3, 2, 1, we're live. Bem-vindos a mais episódio do Don't Panic, It's Organic, da nossa playlist Hanging with the Pros. E dessa vez, uma lenda, uma das grandes influências que acompanha meu conteúdo, sabe que esse cara foi a fundação de todo o meu trabalho, Rand Fishkin. So, now switching to English, Rand, thank you very much for accepting this, I would say, out of the blue invitation. And I didn't expect that you even to answer my email, to be very, very honest with you.
Obrigado.
There you go.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Glad to join.
Good. It's like, I can't, as we were talking just a minute ago, I can't stress enough how much your content influenced my SEO career. Back in the days of SEO, most your articles, Whiteboard Fridays, I think I saw it all, all of them. It helped me kind of like create the foundation of how I work with SEO, how I approach things from content, technical side of things. But for those that might have been living under a rock here in Brazil and in Portugal, please introduce yourself for us. Who's Rand Fishkin?
Sure. So I started a company which a lot of folks in the SEO space might know called Moz, which provides software and a lot of resources and content. I ran that company for many years, stepped down as CEO a few years ago, and then left in 2018 to start this new company, Sparktoro, which is not in the SEO space, but rather in market research and audience intelligence. Plenty of agencies and marketers do use Sparktoro, and it has some overlap with the field, but it's not specifically for search marketing. I also published this book that you see behind me, Lost and Founder. I do a lot of, like yourself, traveling, speaking, events, conferences, which I miss terribly. It's
Tell me about it.
Yeah, brutal. And I also was the host of a popular video series on SEO called Whiteboard Friday that a lot of folks know me from. And hopefully this year I'll have a new video series coming for Sparktoro.
I must confess, Whiteboard Friday is still my favorite videos from SEO. I know some folks might say it's dated, but I think most of that content, I must confess, I still use as a reference nowadays, and I do miss it. So please come up with the blue.
I got
Fridays.
My whiteboard set up on the wall over there. I just gotta get it going.
There you go. That's amazing. So I'm looking forward for those whiteboard any days that you might come up with those videos. Rand, am I correct in assuming that you started your career in digital marketing through SEO, or am I
through
wrong
web design, actually?
Web design. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So what led you to SEO? How SEO came into your life and your career?
So my mom and I, Jillian, who's my co-founder at Moz, right? The two of us started working together when I dropped out of college, and I was doing web design. She had been running a sort of graphic design and classic marketing agency for a while. And we were struggling financially very badly. Didn't even have the money to pay our subcontractors. So we had clients who had contracted us to design a website, build it, and then help it get search traffic, but we couldn't afford to pay our SEO subcontractors.
All right.
So we had promised this work. We didn't have any money. So I had to learn SEO myself in order to provide the service that we had promised. And it turned out I was pretty good at it. So, so that became, first sort of a small subsection of our business, and then the primary business. And eventually we transitioned to software.
So when you had this design company, which, by the way, guys, it is a passage that you tell in Lost and Founders, right? You talk about that. I read that book. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So back before that design company, that was an SEO Moz. SEO Moz came afterwards, right?
Yeah, SEO Moz was initially just the blog, and then it became the name of the whole company.
Ah, that's cool. And I think like most SEOs, you started by researching and doing some reading what's out there, or testing and reverse engineering into Google. So yeah, you also wrote a book about it, The Art of SEO, right?
Yeah.
You, Eric Eng, Stracciona, and Stephen Spencer, which out of that crew, I met Stephen Spencer at an event back in Finland with SEMrush.
Oh,
and
nice.
now I've got you down and now, because it's on my back, it's on the back there. Who had the idea? What led to that book?
I believe it was Stefan's idea. I think he had pitched O'Reilly, the publisher, on an SEO book, sort of a manual for SEO, something that would be ongoing. And of course, O'Reilly publishes, at least here in the United States, and I think in a lot of other languages around the world, they publish a lot of reference work for C++ and Java and JavaScript and PHP and Perl, all these sort of programming languages and books about building for the web. So a book about SEO made sense, but I don't know how long you've been in the industry, Felipe, but in the early years, like 96 to about 2010, even 2009, SEO was just hated. Like everybody hated it. Programmers hated it. Executives hated it. Ad folks hated it. Normal, regular marketers hated it. It's only really in the last 10 years that SEO has become a profession that is worthy of any kind of dignified respect and has this, standard operating procedure. Everyone's familiar with it. People know what it is. It's a, very reasonable way to do marketing. But in those early years, it was very disrespected. And so in 2000, I think it was 2009 or 10, when Stefan first pitched the SEO book to O'Reilly, it was challenging to get it over that hurdle. There was not that sense that SEO was deserving of an O'Reilly title. But it worked out really well. And the four of us, I think, put together, a really great book. I contributed to the first 2 or 3 editions. And then since then, I think the other authors have continued to update it. So I believe a 4th edition is on its way.
Yep. All right. Yeah, I think I bought the 2nd edition back in the days. I've been working with SEO since 2006, 2007. I've also...
so you remember.
Oh, yeah. I've started in SEO doing the old days of the old link building, directory submissions, and, it was the Wild West back then. It was like, I got the end of the meta keywords and stuff like that, article marketing, spinning, and so on. I did my reverse engineering into the industry as well. So, yeah, I think I saw that transition, and I think I agree with you when you say that from 2010, things started to get a bit more serious, which leads me to my question. Maybe you have answered that, but if you could elaborate a bit more. Since those days, I'm not back in 96. I've interviewed Judith Lewis the other day, and she's from that age as well, 96, 97. I said, Jesus Christ, I didn't even think about maybe internet at that time. But since the first edition of the book, how much has really SEO changed? The modus operandi, has it really changed, or still can be kind of like, no, not that much, just got more important?
Let's see. So I think the weird part to me is SEO has become much more standard. So almost everyone who is operating on the web today is doing a decent job of SEO, right? In 2006, for example, 98% of all the websites on the internet were terrible at SEO. Today, I don't know if I'd say 98%, but 80% of the websites are doing much better than, than anybody was doing in 2006. And that is, that's a testament to Google's growth, obviously, and their influence over the web. It's also, unfortunately, a sign of their monopoly, right? They just have incredible power over search, and not just over search, but over web traffic overall. So if you want to earn web traffic, you have no choice, right? There's not a lot of options out there. I think the big shifts in SEO have been just a complete rebalancing of the ranking equation, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, even 12, links were everything. You could have the worst content that did nothing for searchers, that was almost useless. But if you had the most links with the right anchor text coming from the right places, pointing to your site, you would rank. It did not matter what your content was. Today, it's almost the inverse. If you have a good brand that people know, like, and trust, and you've got content that solves the searcher's problems better than anybody else, you can often get away with very few links. You see a ton of content today ranking at the top of the search engine results with almost no links pointing to it. Usually it's hosted on a decent domain that does have some links, but Google is very, very good at sort of predictively identifying content that will solve searchers' problems. And of course, their system today is not, what it was in the 2000s, even as late as 2012, right? Google was an engineer design system, right? People like you and I would sit in a room with a bunch of engineers and we'd look at search results and we'd say, okay, let's try weighting, I don't know, anchor text a bit less, and let's try weighting keyword use a bit more, right? And then we'd come up with some fancy equation and we'd try to see how it worked. That is not how things go anymore. Today, it's a machine learning system, right? It's in fact built on a deep neural network. And so the concept now is, let's optimize for what predicts the highest amount of searcher satisfaction, and we'll let the computers optimize, right? The machine algorithm will optimize what the ideal settings for any given search query are. In reality, I don't know if you feel this way, I kind of feel like if you were to ask a senior Google engineer who works on search rankings, hey, how much weight does anchor text carry? They could not answer you. They don't know.
No.
They have no idea. And the answer probably varies from query to query, because a machine learning system is not designed to say, oh, we'll make 15% of the grade anchor text. It's not. That's not how it works. It's designed to deliver the highest searcher satisfaction, and that balance of the equation could change day to day, hour to hour.
I completely agree with you. And I think 2 points here. In my opinion, things started to change when Google figured out one thing. I don't know if that's true or not. It's my theory, like when they started to say, SEOs are always looking for that ranking factor. Back in the days, Moz ranking factors, search metrics, those were the contents that we were looking for every year. They don't even get published anymore, do they? Very rarely. They lost their reference.
I did a survey version for Sparktoro last year of sort of, how do search marketers generally feel about this stuff? Because I love gathering that survey data, but you're right? The ranking factors themselves is so much less important today than solving the searcher's query and building a brand that people know, like, and trust, and creating the content that will, do a better job than anyone else in the rankings. That's just how it goes. But so Felipe, so the story goes, as I understand it from inside Google, is that Amit Singhal, who was previously the head of the search quality team, was very opposed to machine learning as being the primary way that the ranking systems worked. And so basically his contention, and obviously, it's since come out that he was also abusive to women inside Google and blah, blah, blah. And just a whole bunch of gross stuff. Yeah. But the core belief that he had was, if we use machine learning as our primary system for ranking websites, we will not be able to explain or understand why a result ranks above another. And that's an unacceptable externality that we just can't do. It was when he was replaced, I can't remember the guy's name who replaced him. He was interim, but the guy who replaced him essentially was a huge believer in machine learning and essentially switched over Google's ranking system. And so this is the time when you see the Penguin updates and the sort of the big shift in, I think it was 2014 or 15, where content started feeling like it was much more important and powerful.
And I think that complements my theory, because I look from 2010 to now, the updates, when they started focusing on what? Giving us user signals, loading time, security, then came Rank Brain with these kind of user experience stuff, and investing in engagement and all those metrics that are still a bit dodgy for us, but you have proven that many of them do have their influence in rankings. And I saw it. It does. Your explanation is more reasonable than mine. Mine is Google is forcing us SEO to focus on quality, user experience, and creating a better web. And that's machine learning. And machine learning complements that. You know, if I look back in 10 years of updates since 2010, when you said things start changing, it's when Google started commenting on the updates and telling us the ones that he wanted us to stress. The more we stressed, the better websites we will create. And then that's it. It's like that's the game changer for me. You know, if you look back,
it was always funny to me, because I feel like in the last, especially like 7 or 8 years, whenever Google comments very publicly and heavily about an algorithm change, that change always seems really small. And then whenever there's a big change and they don't say anything, that's the one that really matters.
Right, oh, definitely, yeah. And talking about updates, what's your take on this infamous core updates? We have hordes of SEOs that advocating knowing what they are and testing it. How do you handle them, or how do you take those answers? I know you're not that in the industry anymore, but you still have your website, your blog, so sure. Ranking is still important for you. How do you take what's the core updates for you? How do you react to them?
It's interesting, right? Because being sort of a business owner and CEO and a content creator, right? Obviously, I do a lot of blogging, a lot of content creation and marketing to help our business, but I'm no longer kind of a professional SEO. And so in many ways, I now have a lot more empathy for, SEO clients and sort of the standard folks in the field who do, I think, what I do, which is I ignore all that shit.
Thank you for saying that.
I think there was a core update in December because I saw a bunch of people commenting on it on Twitter. I didn't notice, I didn't pay attention, I don't care, it doesn't matter to me, right? I just don't care what Google is up to, and haven't paid much attention to what they've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, because it doesn't matter to me. Right? It matters far more to me whether I can write a great blog post, or figure out a new video series, or get a great title for my piece of content, or send a great tweet. Those things matter far more to me than what exactly happened in the last Google Core update. That it just has no bearing on my work or my day-to-day. And you might say, but Rand, it could affect your Sparktoro's traffic, and that could have an impact on how many new subscribers you get, and then, how much the business is growing. And the answer is, for us, really not in comparison to the work that we do, right? So what Google does is so much less important than what we do for ourselves, that it just doesn't cross the barrier into important, worthy of paying attention to. And that, that I don't worry about. The big thing, I'll be honest, the big thing that I worry about from Google, and I really do pay attention to, is how much traffic they are cannibalizing, right? So, Google keeps entering space after space and putting, their own sort of answers to things. I saw, the Google Question Hub is getting more prominent. That I pay attention to, because I do think this is a serious infringement on the opportunity that is present for content. And so a lot of the things that I've been thinking about the last couple of years are, is it possible that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, Google will be a crappy channel for traffic? It'll still be a great thing to want to influence, but it won't send much traffic. And so therefore, how do I invest in getting traffic from Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and Reddit and Quora and Medium and TikTok and Instagram and all these places, because Google is going to keep sending more and more of the traffic that comes to them back to themselves.
Correct if I'm wrong here, but you're talking about your zero-click searches, something that I think one of the first articles I saw when you started Sparktoro, you did a research together with a company, I can't remember the name.
Jump Shot, yeah.
Jump Shot, exactly. Around that, I saw a lot of talks that you did, one in Brighton SEO around zero-click searches. It's one of my questions. It was down the line here, but how much that since then, and you've been monitoring that, how much that has been changing? Because I have been noticing more and more zero-click searches. Google's using our content to hold people, to give them the answers and hold them inside their realm, let's say in the SERP, and not give us the traffic. So yeah, are you still monitoring that? Is that changing a lot? Is Google still being evil with that?
The answer is yes, but 2020 is a sort of an exception, and that is primarily because of the pandemic. So, if you look at the previous 10, 15 years of web traffic, every year, more and more people are using, their mobile devices to browse the web and search and whatever, get answers, and less their desktops until February of 2020, right? In February of 2020, suddenly desktop traffic starts rising again, and that has continued throughout the last year. So now far more people are on their laptops and their big screens because they're home, because it's the pandemic, because they don't have any choice, right? And that has meant that we saw a return to more click-through rate, a higher click-through rate, because desktop click-through rate is so much higher than mobile. So, in a way, last year was really, really good for organic search traffic. Not only was there, I think a 40%, 50% boost in worldwide internet usage. So just way more people clicking, way more web pages, searching more, visiting more sites, all that kind of stuff. But also we saw more desktop activity instead of mobile. So last year is a blip. It's continued, right? Obviously the pandemic is still raging as we're having this conversation, and probably will be for, who knows, 6-9 months at least. And the, the question is when that changes, right? When we go back to a world where travel is more possible, where commuting is more possible, where offices are more possible, what happens? Does that continue? Do people shift back to their mobile devices? Does that happen fast or slow? My suspicion is it will be a fairly quick switch back to mobile, and it will be a quick switch to a huge loss of traffic, and sort of we'll feel that across the field, right? The pandemic, as it ends, more people will spend less time doing Zoom calls, right? And on their desktops. And a lot more people will be out at bars and restaurants and parties and traveling and going everywhere, and they'll be on their mobile devices, and Google will do more and more to keep those people in its ecosystem, just as they have been. So even as they've been making advances, I think it's been less noticeable. And so a lot of SEOs are like, oh, it seems like that problem is not as bad, or it's not getting worse. It will get worse. Just give it time.
Yeah, and I think one of the also points that you make around zero-click searches is how Google favors their products. Sometimes they're not even qualified to rank. Like I give you an example, Google Flights. Why is it ranking above some like Skyscanner, for instance, which is even much better? And YouTube and images. I think people are not noticing that, but gradually they are giving advantages to their products, which takes away, like say, the democracy of the organic rankings as it should, isn't it?
Yeah,
are you noticing that as well? I think that's when you point that out when you do the research. Okay.
Yeah, so this is one of the big frustrations that I have, right? In the United States, at least, which is where Google is based, right? Mm-hmm. We have, a whole raft of antitrust laws, right? And the idea is if you build a monopoly in one space, right? If you own the railroads, which is that's how our antitrust laws were written, right? Back in the late 1800s, a couple companies owned the railroads, and they also started entering the gas and oil business. And we're like, well, look, if you want to ship your gas and oil, you got to sell to us. So that they unfairly used their monopoly power in one business, railroads, right, and transportation, to enter and compete in another business. To my mind, the same thing is happening right now, right? Google is essentially saying, oh, did you want to create video on the internet? Well, guess what, friends? You're going to have to use YouTube, because we're not going to show anything from anybody else. And that is, that's accurate, right? There's something like 95% of all videos that show up on the first page of Google are
YouTube.
From YouTube, right? and that is not YouTube's just the best result, right? No, that's bullshit. In 2014, I think it was July 7th of 2014, in one day, it went from about 55% YouTube to 95% YouTube. They just made an algorithm change to make sure that no one but YouTube could show up. And
we do changes democratically, right? To the algorithm. Not really. I know that.
I mean, Google Flights is the same story, right? Google creates their own flights product and they decide, put it at the top. How good is it? It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to compete with anybody else. We just immediately put it at the top of the results. And if it's not that good, it'll get good over time because it'll get the most usage data. And then we'll be able to learn what people want, and we'll get more stuff, and they can use the power of, hey, millions of people every day are going to see Google Flights. So Alaska Airlines, you better work with us.
Yeah, same with hotels, and they're just expanding, aren't they? I think restaurants will come, and I think we'll just see the days of the democracy, as I like to call, of organic rankings vanishing. Either play our game or don't play at all. That's sad.
Yeah. And I think, there's two ways to think about this, right? One way is to say, some people think that it's Google's product, they can do what they want. For those people, I would say, okay, you don't believe that antitrust laws should exist. So let's fight against them. But if you think those laws should exist and everyone should be subject to the same sort of fair laws, then let's hold Google to the same standard we held to Microsoft in the 90s, or AT&T years before that, or the railroads in the 1800s. That is how these things work, right? That no one should be above the law.
I totally agree. I'm with you. And let's see what will come out of these antitrusts that they're going through. But switching gears here slightly, Rand, around from SEO to other stuff. Lost in Founders is, I love the art of SEO, but it's not a full book from yourself. Lost in Founders, I love it. It's my favorite book. Why? Because it's a book that helped me make the transition from employee to entrepreneur. I have been working in many SEO agencies, being director and so on of big agencies here in Brazil and in the UK as well. And then I decided to join with my partner here now today, Alan, at Hedgehog. And Lost in Founder helped me do that. And you also had a transition from Moz to Sparktoro. What is Sparktoro and what led you to it?
Sure. So Sparktoro is a market research and audience intelligence tool. And basically, the easiest way to explain it is it lets you instantly discover what your audience reads, watches, listens to, and follows. If you want to know what chemical engineers in the UK, which YouTube channels they subscribe to, Sparktoro can tell you. If you want to know what fiction authors in New York are reading and watching, Sparktoro can tell you. If you want to know which podcasts are popular with architects in Los Angeles, Sparktoro can tell you. And so for a lot of marketers, a big part of our job is understanding our audience's behaviors. What do they do? Where do they go? How do they describe themselves? What do they talk about online? What hashtags do they use? And this data is incredibly useful for both outreach forms of marketing, right? If you're trying to figure out which podcasts to guest on, or figure out where to, try and pitch an article, or try and get a link, or try and form a partnership. And it's also important on the advertising side, right? Which Facebook pages are really popular with my audience, or which Instagram accounts are well followed by them. All right, let me use those as my inputs to advertise against, or let me use those as sources to do influencer marketing. And unfortunately, that practice, that sort of market research, audience intelligence, it is because it's been so difficult, because there was no automated way to do it really before Sparktoro, many marketers just don't invest, right? It's just not a practice that a lot of people do. And so, our job the last couple of years has been basically trying to not only, sell people on the idea of Sparktoro, but sell people on the idea of doing market research, of understanding your audience so that you can reach them with the right messages in the right place at the right time.
That's interesting that you said, and I have been following up the work on what you're doing on the blog of Sparktoro. Since you came up with it, I must confess I struggled to understand. And gradually, when you started this series of blog posts, giving examples of how people can use it, that kind of like I said, yeah, I think I can use these. And we're talking here because of one of your articles, the one about outreaching tips.
Oh, cool.
That I shared with my team, Carol, which is the head of link building and content marketing. And she said, this is genius. This is such a great article. And this is the tool that I can use it. I'm going to email him and use one of his techniques. And it worked. Awesome. And it worked. So can you, not going fully back to SEO talk again, but how can Sparktoro be used by link builders and PR professionals alike? What's in it for us?
Yeah, so the practice of digital PR, which is central to sort of SEO link building and also influence building broadly, digital PR is essentially saying we are going to try and get our brand, our story, our topic talked about in places that our audience already reads and pay attention to, right? They subscribe to this email newsletter about this content subject. They read this website. They follow this person on Twitter. They follow this account on LinkedIn. They follow this Facebook page. They go to this subreddit. They follow this YouTube channel, whatever it is. Digital PR is about being in those places so that your message reaches the people in your audience through a source they already trust, right? You have subscribers to this podcast and they trust you to give them information about what's going on in search marketing and what's going on in the world of SEO and Google, which is awesome because they trust you already. And you've built up this audience, people who are trying to influence search marketers, especially search marketers in Brazil and Portugal, might say, oh man, how do we figure out what they pay attention to? Right. And if they were to go to Sparktoro and type in, my audience frequently talks about SEO or uses these words in their profile, search engine optimization, and they're located in, Brazil. You click on the podcast tab and there's your podcast. And now, oh, okay, great. That's who I should be talking to. That's how I should reach out to. That's who I should try and pitch or sponsor or work with. And that data is invaluable because it's not about saying who has the most followers, who has the most traffic. I don't care, right? To my mind, that's like who has
the highest domain authority.
Yeah, domain authority is a fine metric for sort of raw SEO link equity, but it does not tell you who the audience is. It doesn't tell you who is paying attention to that source. A DA70 website and a DA40 website, it doesn't matter. If I'm trying to reach architects in Los Angeles, DA is a useless number. What I really want to know is it 12% of architects that visit this website, or 4%, or 1%, or 60%? And that's what Sparktoro tells you, right? You type in, my audience uses these words in their profile, architect, or my audience uses this hashtag, rock climbing, or my audience frequently talks about Dungeons and Dragons, right? A game.
Yeah.
And then Sparktoro can tell you, oh yes, people who talk about that game, they follow these accounts, they visit these websites, and these are in these percentages. And so now as a digital PR person or a link builder or a content marketer, you can understand where you can go pitch and amplify your work to reach exactly the audience that you want to reach.
I think this is just such a powerful tool. As I said, as I started playing around with it. I said, and then when I saw the article, I said, this is very, very valuable, because it takes, I must confess, since the days you guys created at SEO at Moz, the domain authority for the link explorer and so on, I said, it got people addicted to it. I still have clients that come to me and say, look, I want links DA 70 plus and nothing lower. I said, why? Oh, because, okay, you guys kind of like created a little monster in the industry, but you know, it was a reference. Yeah. But for me, I never, seriously, I talked to my team and clients, I said, I don't care about that. Let's focus on who's the audience of that. And when Sparktoro came, I said, man, Carol, this is what we need. I said to her, look, we must use it.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the, it's sort of that missing metric. I'm sure you've had this experience, right? You go pitch a new client, you know, you walk into the room and there's the CEO and the executives and all that. And you're like, okay, here's our plan. We want to go get you whatever, these kind of links, or we want to get stories in these publications. We want to get on these YouTube channels. We think we should sponsor some of these podcasts. And this will increase our brand equity among the audience that you want to reach. And, you know, the CEO is like, no, I want you to get me in the New York Times. Why, man? What? I get that there's prestigious publications, right? So maybe you want to show whatever, you want to show your parents or your grandparents or your mother-in-law, like, look, my company was in the New York Times. See, we're important. All right, fine.
You can pay for it.
But that is not about reaching the audience that cares about your product, right? If you need to, as a marketer, prove to an executive that a publication, a podcast, a YouTube channel, a social account, a person, a source of influence, an email newsletter, that those things reach your audience, how are you going to do it? Like there was no way before Sparktoro, which is what frustrated the heck out of me. There was no way to tell you, oh, this % of this group of people online pays attention to this publication. You'd have to do it manually.
And that's super time consuming.
Oh my God, right?
To be honest, I don't even know how to, well, I could, but it would take ages, you know?
It does, yeah. So the way people were doing it, this is actually how Sparktoro works, right? You'd take like all the email addresses in your customer database, you'd send them through like Clearbits API or Full Contacts API, get all of their social accounts, all the ones that have public social accounts, and then you build a crawler to go crawl all those social accounts, and then you download everything they follow and engage with and like and comment on and whatever, and then you aggregate those together, and now you've got your percentages. But that is, you know, you are talking months of work, custom crawlers, custom, you know, analysis. With Sparktoro, you're literally getting that in 3 seconds.
The cost benefit of that is not even, we can't even start talking about it because it won't be.
And so the way we developed Sparktoro is we saw some really smart in-house teams building that so that they could do better marketing. And we were like, holy shit.
This is what we need.
That is a crazy amount of work, right? We were like, we should just do that for the whole internet. Like,
we should create Sparktoro, right?
Yeah.
And I see that my comparison is like those highly trafficked keywords against long tail. Should I rank first for iPhone because it's going to bring me 1 million visits, or should I go with, you know, Apple iPhone 64 gigabytes, you know, just an example, which generates conversions. I see that as the same thing, you know. Why should I be on the New York Times when I'm going to have 1 million views, but no clicks on my link, no visits, no conversions, just to stick on my wall or put on my website, featured in the New York Times. So what?
Yeah.
I think that's much more valuable.
I mean, one story in the New York Times, especially for a small or mid-sized brand, that could take literally years of work, right? To sort of position yourselves and to tell that story and to do all the things, build the relationships, you know, run the PR campaign, literal years to do that. And I've seen it before. At Moz, I literally tried to do this, right? Tried to get into those big publications, not because I thought it would impress my audience, right? It wasn't, you know, it doesn't reach any SEOs, but because I wanted to impress venture capitalists, right? I was trying to get more investment, and I thought, and there was a correlation between sort of getting press in those outlets and having VCs think you were important. But that process is so time consuming that the ROI sucks. It really sucks. If you can find, I mean, you know this well, if you can find 2 dozen, 3 dozen publications that are relatively small, niche, maybe reach, I don't know, thousands to tens of thousands of people in your audience, and you can get in front of them, you can spend 1/100th the effort and dollars in that digital PR campaign to reach a far broader swath of the group you want to reach, and you'll have a way easier time doing it.
And I must say, I think that we even have a higher influence in rankings than just one link from that major publication.
I mean, the New York Times links to you, that's a great thing, right? But
definitely.
If 10 publications in your field link to you, in my mind, I think the machine learning algorithm from Google is going to say that is a far more relevant website in that field than, oh, they have one link for the New York Times.
Definitely, especially now that we're talking a lot about entity optimization and so on. Google is making those connections, link distance and so on. Obviously, like here in Brazil, it's global.com, which is the big network. Everybody wants to be there, but I'd rather be in various different niches for my clients, which I know and I can prove that they generate more results than, doing all the 6 months of work to create something, to pitch to the journalists, take them for coffee and lunch and so on, to try and get, because that's how it works. And it's a lot of work. I'd rather get their money and spend with something more useful. And I think I'm glad
you can show much faster results, right? If you can find those, oh, here's 10 podcasts. We're going to go pitch these 10 podcasts. How are you going to do it? Well, I mean, I think the best way to pitch a podcast is to get an introduction from somebody who's already been a guest. So great. You want to be on Felipe's podcast, you email Rand, and Rand is like, hey, Felipe, have you thought about having so-and-so on your podcast? Dude, pretty good chance that you get an invitation, right? So like that's, I think, the way to play it. Cool. And I apologize. I have got to run to another.
Definitely. I was going to say that's the last question I have for you, which is, I always end this with this one. Anyone starting in SEO or digital marketing, what advice would you give? And this is a tougher one because we just went through the craziest year ever in human history, I think. So what advice would you give them? Just the people that start in the industry.
Yeah, I think I would not do what I did again and sort of start, my own firm right away out of college. I would go work at a couple agencies, maybe work in-house. I like agency work, particularly because you just get to see so many different campaigns early on. I think that's a great way to start a career in digital marketing. And then I would specialize. Right. Because digital marketing is so broad. There are so many players and people. It's such a dense field, but there are many, many sectors of the digital marketing world that are that still have tons and tons of room to build up a brand around, oh, you know what? That woman is incredible at, whatever it is, digital PR in the home and garden space. That person is absolutely amazing at link building through podcasts, right? Like if you want to talk digital marketing on podcasts, that's the person talk. Those kinds of specializations can build up brand equity, affinity, recognition, notoriety in ways that broad digital marketing just can't. So start an agency, specialize.
Great. Cool. Thank you very much, Randy. That was, I think we could have a chat here all day, but I know you're a busy guy. We will need to carry on with our life. It was a pleasure having you, and we'll keep in touch. I'll keep following your work because, as I said, it really helped me, and you're really a great guy, and the content that you bring, it does bring a different perspective to everything, and I just think it's super valuable to the market. So thank you very much for accepting and being on the show, and continue with that great work.
Oh, thank you so much. Been an honor to be here, and look forward to joining you again someday.
Will do. I'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.